In the marble halls of the Republic, where power flows like wine and gold, a different kind of storm is brewing. Beneath the grandeur of conquest and triumph, millions toil in chains, their names forgotten, their dreams buried under the weight of empire. From the blood-soaked sands of amphitheaters to the endless rows of plantation fields, human souls have become commodities, traded like grain and counted like cattle. Yet in this vast machinery of domination, where the strong devour the weak and freedom belongs only to the fortunate few, something dangerous stirs. For even the mightiest empires rest upon foundations built by human hands, and what mortal hands have built, mortal courage can tear down. This is the story of what happens when the impossible becomes inevitable, when kitchen knives transform into instruments of revolution, and when those deemed less than human prove they possess the most human quality of all, the unbreakable will to be free. Across the wine-dark Mediterranean, where trireme oars cut through swells that have witnessed empires rise and fall, Roman legions march with methodical precision. Their bronze-tipped standards gleam in sunlight that watched Carthage burn and Athens kneel, while beneath studded sandals lies the dust of nations that dared resist conquest's relentless machinery. Yet for all their victories, for all the treasures flowing toward the seven hills, this republic carries within its swelling borders the seeds of its own torment. In the century before a Thracian warrior shakes imperial dominion's foundations, the conquering city transforms through victory itself. Campaigns beginning as defensive wars against Gallic raiders evolve into systematic subjugation of the known world. Spain's silver mines, worked by souls whose grandfathers fought for Hannibal, pour wealth into coffers funding fresh expeditions. Greece's libraries yield wisdom to Latin speakers struggling to pronounce philosophers' names whose thoughts will reshape their understanding of governance. From Corinth's smoking ruins to captured Asian strongholds, human cargo flows toward Italian markets like tributaries feeding a mighty river. Gauls whose blonde hair marks them as curiosities, Germans whose fierce eyes burn with freedom's memory, Greeks whose education makes them valuable tutors, all find themselves stripped of names, families, and futures to serve masters measuring worth in sestertii. Like lifeblood to an empire, networks of transport move people across the Republic, all bound for the heart of its ambition. Ships designed for cargo pack, holds with chained prisoners in spaces barely fit for livestock. Overland routes see columns trudging through mountain passes, where ancestors once hunted, now destined for latifundia, where olive groves demand hands that will never reap profit from their labor. Markets springing up in every major city become theaters, where human dignity dies daily. Auctioneers announce merchandise qualities that once bore proud names in distant lands. Buyers examine teeth like horse traders, test muscles like farmers evaluating breeding stock, discussing bloodlines with casual expertise of those viewing humans as investment calculations. Italian countryside transforms under imported labor's weight into landscapes astounding earlier generations. Vast estates stretch beyond horizons, boundaries marked by guard towers where overseers watch for rebellion among workers with nothing left to lose. Olive groves in mathematical precision replace small farms where citizen soldiers raised families. Orderly rows tended by hands remembering different soil in distant homelands. These agricultural factories operate according to principles maximizing production while minimizing workers' humanity. Dawn sees hundreds marching to fields under armed escort, movements coordinated by supervisors calculating productivity in terms reducing human effort to measurement units. Noon brings brief respites where laborers whisper, sharing homeland memories, while guards ensure rest periods don't exceed efficient limits. While temples rise, Misery festers underground, where workers labor by flickering oil light in the cold stone belly of marble quarries. Here, where air tastes of stone dust and sweat, workers whose crimes may have been defending villages extract beauty from living rock for masters never descending into subterranean hells. Rhythmic hammer pounding creates percussion echoing through tunnels, where cave-ins bury the unlucky beneath limestone destined for patrician villas. Yet among all bondage forms characterizing this expanding republic, none capture the Latin imagination, like armed combatants fighting to death for crowd entertainment. Gladiator schools, academies of violence where the condemned learn stylish death, represent ultimate transformation of human despair into commercial spectacle. Here, in compounds where high walls ensure trained killers cannot escape destiny, choreographed death reaches sophistication, rivaling any legitimate stage performance. Arena combat economics balance instruction, costs against public spectacle revenues. Skilled fighters represent investments requiring years to mature, preparation consuming resources including food, medical care, arms, and instructor expertise. Understanding that entertainment value depends upon technique as much as courage. The finest performers command purchase prices exceeding luxury villa costs, worth measured in their ability to transform blood into excitement, keeping crowds returning to amphitheaters. Their preparation is so exacting that by the time battle comes, they stand shoulder to shoulder in skill with Rome's finest. Daily routines beginning before dawn and continuing until exhaustion develop reflexes meaning survival difference when facing equally desperate opponents. Steel practice, emphasizing individual technique and tactical awareness, produces combatants adapting to arena conflict's variety of challenges. Among the most prestigious human factories stands Lentulus Badiatus's school in Capua, that prosperous city where imperial wealth mingles with Campanian sophistication, creating luxury atmospheres built upon systematic brutality foundations. Here, in buildings combining patrician villa architectural elegance with military fortress security features, approximately 200 souls learn artistry that transforms murder into performance art. Wooden swords ringing against practice shields create rhythms echoing through courtyards where warriors sweat under instructors' critical gaze. Understanding survival depends upon technique perfection. Heavy posts bearing countless session scars absorb blows, developing strength and endurance necessary for amphitheater conflict. Sand-covered practice areas become theaters, where future performers rehearse movements that may purchase their lives when facing equally skilled, equally desperate opponents. Within these fighter-containing walls, ethnic diversity creates tensions mirroring broader conflicts raging across the expanding republic. Gauls whose fathers fought Caesar share quarters with Germans, remembering defeats at imperial hands. Thracians, whose tribes rode freely across Balkan plains, sleep beside Syrians whose cities fell to siege engines. Greeks whose education surpasses their captors find themselves grouped with Nubians, whose spear techniques represent martial traditions predating the Seven Hills founding. The Mithridatic Wars context leaves Italy vulnerable, as the Republic's finest legions fight Mithridates VI in distant Asia, stretching military resources thin. This creates opportunities keen observers note for future reference. Fewer guards, reduced garrisons, and an empire overextended across multiple fronts simultaneously. Where language blocks understanding, control takes root, fragmenting opposition and preventing the unity that shared struggle might have forged. Guards speaking multiple tongues monitor conversations indicating brewing conspiracies, while exercise schedules separating individuals by fighting style prevent unified group formation, threatening institutional security. Among this condemned collection stands a warrior whose presence suggests stories. His current circumstances make irrelevant to those owning his body, if not spirit. Spartacus bears scars marking him as a veteran of conflicts shaping distant provincial political landscapes, yet his past details remain carefully guarded. Thracian by birth, his warfare knowledge extends beyond elementary arena techniques to encompass strategic thinking. Imperial auxiliary units learn through professional service years. The circumstances reducing this experienced soldier to human property status remain shrouded in silence, protecting survivors, preferring to forget rather than remember, choices leading to current degradation. Some whisper he served the Republic faithfully until political changes made continued service inconvenient, while others suggest he led resistance against expansion until capture made opposition impossible. What cannot be disputed is his military organization, logistics, and tactics, understanding exceeding anything ordinary criminal prisoners could possess. Physical conditioning marking his body speaks of years in professional military service, where survival depended upon maintaining peak fighting capability. Muscle development coming only from carrying heavy equipment across long distances, reaction times reflecting multiple steel system experience, and situational awareness constantly evaluating potential threats. These characteristics separate him from other captives whose criminal backgrounds provided no systematic warfare preparation. Leadership qualities, manifesting in subtle ways, attract fellow prisoners recognizing natural authority when encountered. His ability settling disputes without violence, organizing work details, accomplishing tasks efficiently, and maintaining morale during despair's darkest moments marks him as a soul born to command rather than merely obey. Guards noticing these qualities prevent him from organizing activities threatening institutional security, yet cannot eliminate respect other captives show towards someone whose competence transcends boundaries, normally separating the condemned. Strategic thinking, evaluating every confinement aspect, reveals security arrangement, weaknesses less experienced prisoners might never notice. His assessment of guard rotations, armament storage procedures, and architectural vulnerabilities creates mental maps cataloging opportunities that might someday prove crucial. Exercise sessions, other captives view merely as amphitheater preparation, become reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence about captor capabilities and limitations. For the commander, forging ties in captivity is part of a larger plan, building a team whose commitment to the mission outweighs individual interests. Crixus, the Gallic warrior whose hatred of the Republic burns with intensity, making him valuable despite impulsive nature, represents fierce courage, proving decisive when properly directed. When Amaius, whose Germanic background provides tribal organization and unconventional warfare knowledge, offers expertise, complementing rather than duplicating his own capabilities. Meanwhile, beyond walls containing these warriors in preparation, broader bondage institution undergoes transformations, making the system both more profitable and inherently unstable. Economic prosperity flowing from conquered territories creates demand for luxury goods and services, requiring skilled artisans and educated administrators. Simple agricultural labor, characterizing earlier forms, evolves into complex systems placing valuable human property in positions where knowledge and capabilities make them nearly indispensable to masters depending upon their expertise. Slave market dynamics reveal systematic breaking of tribal and ethnic bonds, deliberately mixing populations to prevent organized resistance. Imperial authorities understand that Gauls fighting alongside fellow Gauls pose greater threats than Gauls isolated among Germans Thracians, and Syrians who cannot communicate effectively. As economic conditions shift, urban bondage gives rise to a class of well-educated, capable individuals whose talents often surpass those they work for. Greek tutors educating Latin children in philosophy, Syrian architects designing buildings demonstrating masters' sophistication, Egyptian physicians treating ailments Republican medicine cannot address, all represent investments whose value increases with instruction and experience. These educated individuals often enjoy living conditions surpassing many free citizens, yet comfort cannot compensate for fundamental injustice or eliminate resentment accumulating when talented people must serve masters whose only dominance qualification lies in birth accidents or military conquest. Psychological tensions resulting from capability status disparity create emotional pressures seeking outlets potentially dangerous to institutional stability. Arena school economics demonstrate massive imperial investment in human property. Top performers cost over 100,000 sestertii. More than luxury villas, their worth measured in their ability generating entertainment revenue. This enormous investment explains why schools maintain such tight security. Losing prepared fighters represents financial catastrophe. Faith-based practices not only comfort the enslaved spiritually, but also create systems of connection that rise above language and ethnic differences. Mystery cults promising salvation to all believers, regardless of social status, create communities where free and unfree participants share common purposes, transcending legal classifications. Christian assemblies meeting secretly to worship a god, supposedly judging all souls, equally plant human dignity. Ideas directly challenging bondage's philosophical foundations. Historical precedents demonstrating successful uprising possibilities provide inspiration for those dreaming of overthrowing oppression. The great rebellions in Sicily required legionary intervention to suppress, constant warfare maintaining control over conquered territories where resentment simmers. These examples prove imperial power, however impressive, is not invincible when facing determined resistance from desperate populations. The Second Servile War, that massive uprising convulsing Sicily barely a generation earlier, offers particularly relevant lessons. Led by Salvius and Athenian, this revolt demonstrated both successful rebellion potential and failure's ultimate consequences. Salvius showed how spiritual authority could transform into political leadership, uniting diverse populations, while Athenian proved proper leadership could transform desperate individuals into disciplined soldiers, challenging legionary formations. The ultimate suppression, accomplished only through full legionary deployment under experienced commanders, revealed both the seriousness with which the Republic regarded such threats and resources required eliminating organized resistance. Crucifixions marking rebellion's end served as warnings, while demonstrating savage vengeance awaiting those daring to challenge imperial society's foundations. Yet the very need for such extreme measures revealed vulnerability beneath the Republic's invincible appearance. If properly organized and sufficiently desperate populations could require legionary deployment needed for frontier defense, then bondage contained within itself potential for strategic damage to imperial interests. As the second century's final decades flow toward crisis defining the next era, tensions accumulate throughout the Mediterranean world, like pressure building within volcanic mountains. The Mithridatic Wars, draining legionary strength from Italian garrisons, create opportunities keen observers note. Political instability, characterizing the late Republic, creates ruling class divisions. Savvy opponents might exploit when circumstances permit decisive action. Within arena schools, where the Republic's most dangerous individuals learn steel fighting, while guards ensure they cannot escape. Awareness grows that conditions may soon create opportunities not existing since Sicilian wars. Conversations during break periods explore possibilities, ranging from simple escape attempts to ambitious schemes, striking meaningful blows against systems reducing free souls to performing animal status. All that remains is the spark igniting tinder, accumulating for generations in hearts of those remembering freedom and refusing to accept current degradation as permanent destiny. Tools lie ready, knowledge exists to use them effectively, and desperation providing motivation burns with intensity growing stronger daily. In Capua's arena school, where 200 of the Republic's most dangerous prisoners practice war arts under guard supervision, believing walls and chains provide adequate security, the Thracian studies weaknesses in systems designed by those underestimating the determination of people they sought to contain. Revolution, reshaping the ancient world, awaits only his decision to transform theory into action, unite the desperate into an army, and test imperial strength against the fury of souls with nothing left to lose except their chains. In the kitchen quarters of Lentulus Batiatus's school, where the scent of barley porridge mingles with the metallic tang of sharpened iron, destiny waits in the most ordinary of implements. Cooking knives that slice bread for evening meals gleam with possibilities that their makers never intended, while carving blades meant for preparing feast day meats whisper promises of liberation to hands calloused by wooden practice swords. Here, among the steam rising from cauldrons and the clatter of serving bowls, 70 souls prepare to transform culinary tools into instruments of revolution. The year 73 BC dawns over Capua, with no omens to warn of the transformation about to unfold. Guards patrol their familiar routes with the casual confidence of those who have never faced serious challenges to their authority. Instructors arrive for another day of drilling fighters whose spirits they believe thoroughly broken by years of systematic dehumanization. The machinery of the institution grinds forward with mechanical precision, its operators blind to the currents of rage and determination flowing beneath the surface of apparent submission. Spartacus moves through these morning routines with the careful calculation of a general preparing for battle. His assessment of guard positions, weapon storage locations, and architectural vulnerabilities has crystallized into a plan whose audacity matches its desperate necessity. The moment approaches when theory must transform into action, when whispered conversations must yield to the clash of steel and the cries of the dying. The signal comes not with trumpet blasts or battle cries, but with a simple gesture that unleashes fury accumulated over months of careful preparation. Kitchen implements seized with swift efficiency become arms in hands trained to kill, their edges finding flesh with precision that speaks of professional military experience. Guards who moments before lounged in comfortable authority find themselves facing opponents whose desperation makes them more dangerous than wild beasts. Blood flows across stone floors, where feet have trod for generations, in patterns of submission and obedience. The first casualties fall not to gladiator strikes or spear thrusts, but to carving knives wielded with surgical precision by fighters who understand that their first moments of combat will determine whether they achieve freedom or face crucifixion. Each fallen guard represents not merely a tactical victory, but psychological liberation from the bonds of assumed helplessness. The armory that contains the school's collection of practice equipment becomes the rebellion's first strategic objective. Here, wooden swords and blunted spears give way to sharpened steel that can cut through armor and bone with equal efficiency. Shields designed to absorb training blows transform into defensive tools capable of turning aside lethal strikes. the implements of choreographed entertainment evolve into instruments of genuine warfare. Beyond the compound walls, supply wagons, approaching with their regular deliveries of food and military hardware, find themselves facing desperate combatants rather than docile prisoners. The wagon train's seizure provides the escapees with their first taste of real battle gear: gladiator swords whose edges gleam with the promise of effective killing, mail shirts that can turn aside enemy blades, helmets that offer protection against the crushing blows of maces and clubs. Strategic distribution of captured equipment reflects the military expertise that sets this uprising apart from ordinary prison riots. Veterans receive priority access to the finest arms and armor, their experience making them natural squad leaders for companions whose courage exceeds their tactical knowledge. Germanic tribesmen, whose backgrounds include familiarity with unconventional warfare, find themselves equipped with tools suited to their preferred fighting styles. Gauls, whose hatred of Rome burns brightest, receive assignments that channel their fury into maximum tactical effectiveness. The breakout itself unfolds with precision that astounds guards who survive the initial assault. Rather than fleeing in panic like ordinary escaped prisoners, the revolutionaries move in coordinated groups that cover each other's withdrawal, while eliminating potential pursuers. Rearguard actions that protect the main body demonstrate tactical sophistication that transforms a desperate escape attempt into a military withdrawal conducted according to professional standards. Mount Vesuvius, that slumbering giant whose volcanic slopes offer refuge to those bold enough to seek shelter in its shadow, becomes the destination for this unlikely army. The volcanic terrain provides natural fortifications that multiply the defensive capabilities of units too small to face Republican legions in open battle. Rocky defiles that channel, approaching enemies into killing zones, caves that offer shelter from both weather and arrows, freshwater springs that ensure the insurgents will not die of thirst during extended sieges. All these advantages draw the escapees toward their new stronghold. The ascent toward these elevated positions demonstrates both the physical conditioning that gladiator school regiments have provided and the tactical wisdom that guides their movements. Trails that wind through terrain too steep and broken for cavalry operations become highways to safety for fighters accustomed to operating on foot. Positions that offer commanding views of approaching enemies while remaining hidden from casual observation provide ideal bases for the guerrilla campaign that circumstances will demand. Vesuvius' tactical advantage becomes apparent as the first Roman response units arrive to investigate reports of the breakout. The mountain's volcanic terrain offers multiple escape routes that prevent encirclement while providing elevated positions from which small groups can harass much larger formations. Natural corridors that funnel approaching troops into predetermined killing zones enable the revolutionaries to maximize their limited numbers' effectiveness against professional military formations. Early recruitment efforts that expand the band beyond its original core demonstrate the widespread dissatisfaction that simmers throughout the region's enslaved population. Agricultural workers who have spent years dreaming of freedom arrive in groups, their knowledge of local terrain and supply sources proving as valuable as the additional fighting strength they provide. Shepherds whose nomadic lifestyle has taught them to move quickly across difficult country bring skills that transform the escapees from stationary defenders into a mobile force capable of striking targets throughout Campania. The speed with which their numbers swell astounds even the most optimistic among the original fighters. What begins as 70 desperate souls evolves within days into a unit numbering in the hundreds, then thousands, as word of the rebellion spreads through communities that have waited generations for such an opportunity. Deserters from Roman auxiliary detachments criminals fleeing justice, and free citizens whose circumstances have become unbearable, all find their way to the volcanic slopes where revolution takes tangible form. Within this growing camp, leadership structures emerge that reflect both the realities of command and the diverse backgrounds of those who have joined the cause. Spartacus assumes overall command through a combination of demonstrated competence and natural authority that transcends ethnic and linguistic boundaries. Crixus leads the Gallic contingent, his fierce loyalty to the cause balanced by tactical rashness that requires careful management. Oenomaus commands Germanic elements whose tribal fighting traditions complement rather than conflict with more conventional military approaches. The election of these leaders occurs not through formal political processes, but through the organic recognition of merit that characterizes military organizations under extreme stress. Warriors who have risked everything for freedom choose commanders based on their ability to keep them alive and help them win battles, rather than hereditary claims or rhetorical skills. The democratic element in these selections reflects values that will characterize the rebellion throughout its existence. Initial Roman response reflects the complacency that has developed among authorities who have never faced serious challenges to their control over enslaved populations. Local magistrates treat the outbreak as a minor disturbance, requiring only militia troops to restore order. Their understanding of the situation shaped by assumptions about the natural inferiority of those in bondage. The small expedition, dispatched under Gaius Claudius Glaber, represents this casual approach to what will prove to be the Republic's most dangerous internal challenge. Glaber's expedition approaches the volcanic stronghold with the confidence of professional soldiers who have never doubted their superiority over desperate amateurs. His troops, equipped with standard governmental military hardware and trained in conventional tactics, expect to overwhelm revolutionary positions through straightforward applications of superior discipline and equipment. The prospect of easy victory over escaped slaves promises both military glory and valuable combat experience for soldiers that have seen little action against serious opponents. The ambush that destroys this Roman force demonstrates tactical innovations that exploit both terrain advantages and enemy overconfidence. Rather than defending static positions that would allow attackers to concentrate their strength, the insurgents employ mobility that keeps government formations off balance while maximizing damage from hit-and-run attacks. The Vesuvius escape becomes a masterpiece of unconventional warfare that transforms apparent encirclement into devastating counterattack. When Roman troops position themselves to seal off the obvious routes down the mountain, they create exactly the conditions that Spartacus has planned to exploit. The impossible cliff face that appears to trap the revolutionaries becomes instead their avenue of escape as combatants rappel down the vertical rock using vine ropes, whose preparation demonstrates the foresight that separates this uprising from ordinary prisoner riots. The descent requires courage that borders on madness, yet provides access to positions from which they can strike the government rear with complete surprise. Attacking from behind transforms the tactical situation from siege to slaughter, as Roman soldiers find themselves caught between steep volcanic slopes and an enemy that appears to have materialized from the very rocks themselves. Formations designed for conventional battlefield encounters prove useless when facing opponents who emerge from concealment to strike with the fury of those who have nothing left to lose. The disciplined ranks that represent governmental military pride dissolve into chaos as individual soldiers struggle to survive against enemies who attack from every direction simultaneously. The destruction of Glaber's force sends shockwaves through the Roman establishment that reach far beyond the immediate military implications. Reports of the defeat that filter back to the capital describe not merely tactical reverse, but systematic annihilation of troops that should have easily overwhelmed desperate amateurs. The realization that escaped slaves can defeat Roman legions challenges fundamental assumptions about social hierarchy and military capability that underpin the entire system. Captured standards and armaments that fall into revolutionary hands provide both practical benefits and enormous psychological advantages. Roman eagles that once symbolized invincible authority now serve as trophies that demonstrate the possibility of victory over seemingly impossible odds. Military gear designed for professional soldiers enables the insurgents to fight future engagements with tools equivalent to those their enemies employ, eliminating the technological disadvantages that might otherwise prove decisive. Plundered supplies that fill revolutionary storehouses ensure that the growing army can sustain itself through the campaigns that lie ahead. Food stores that were intended to feed Roman garrisons now nourish warriors whose success depends upon maintaining the physical strength that arena discipline has developed. Medical supplies that enable treatment of wounded combatants ensure that casualties do not automatically become fatalities, preserving experienced fighters whose survival multiplies the army's overall effectiveness. The momentum generated by this first victory creates opportunities for expansion that transform a local uprising into a regional rebellion. Communities throughout Campania that have endured generations of oppression see in the revolutionary success proof that resistance can achieve practical results rather than merely heroic martyrdom. The psychological impact of defeating Roman troops spreads far beyond the immediate battlefield, inspiring hope in hearts that have known only despair, while striking fear into those who have never questioned their right to dominate others. Word of the rebellion spreads through communication networks that span the Italian peninsula, like wildfire consuming dry grassland. Merchants whose travels carry them between distant markets become unwitting messengers of revolution. Their reports of escaped slaves defeating Roman legions, reaching audiences that include both potential recruits and concerned authorities. The stories grow with each retelling, transforming tactical victory into legendary triumph that captures imaginations throughout the region. What begins as a desperate cause soon produces intelligent structures more sophisticated than anything Rome believes its enemies capable of. Agricultural workers who remain in their assigned positions provide information about troop movements and supply convoys while maintaining their cover as submissive laborers. Urban artisans, whose skills make them valuable to their masters, pass along intelligence about political developments and military planning that enables revolutionary commanders to anticipate enemy actions. Supply systems that develop to sustain the growing army reflect both practical necessity and strategic thinking that looks beyond immediate survival toward long-term campaign requirements. Raids against Roman supply convoys provide gear and provisions while denying resources to enemy units, creating tactical advantages that compound over time. Agricultural raids that target latifundia not only feed revolutionary soldiers, but also strike at the economic foundations of the system they seek to overthrow. The insurgents' approach to prisoners reveals character traits that distinguish this uprising from ordinary criminal enterprises. Roman soldiers who surrender receive treatment that reflects military honor rather than personal vendetta, their lives spared in exchange for information about enemy dispositions and intentions. This policy creates practical benefits by encouraging defection, while demonstrating moral authority that legitimizes revolutionary claims to represent justice rather than mere revenge. Simultaneously, those who have participated in the most brutal aspects of the slave system face harsher treatment that reflects the accumulated anger of generations. Overseers whose whips have scarred the backs of agricultural workers trainers whose methods have broken spirits as well as bodies, and dealers whose profits have been built upon human misery. These representatives of systematic oppression discover that revolution brings consequences that match their crimes. As autumn approaches and the revolutionary army grows beyond anything its founders imagined possible, the reality of their situation becomes clear to both participants and observers. What began as a desperate escape attempt has evolved into a military formation capable of challenging Roman authority throughout southern Italy. The transformation from entertainment slaves to liberating army represents an achievement that few would have thought possible. Yet the greater challenges lie ahead as winter approaches and governmental responses escalate to match the threat they now recognize. The camp that takes shape on Vesuvius's slopes reflects organizational capabilities that transform desperate refugees into the foundation of a revolutionary state. Workshops that produce arms and gear operate with efficiency that rivals Roman arsenals, their output enabling continued expansion while maintaining quality standards necessary for effective combat. Medical facilities that treat wounded combatants demonstrate care for human life that contrasts sharply with the callous attitudes that characterize the system they oppose. Training programs that prepare new recruits for combat blend the military expertise that gladiator schools provided with tactical innovations adapted to their specific circumstances. Veterans who survived the initial breakout share their knowledge with agricultural workers, whose courage exceeds their combat experience. The resulting synthesis creates hybrid fighting styles that maximize individual capabilities while maintaining unit cohesion necessary for large-scale operations. These expanding communication systems prove key to keeping distant operations in sync, reflecting a central authority more organized than it appears. Messages that travel between revolutionary detachments carry intelligence about enemy movements, while coordinating attacks that maximize strategic impact. The networks that emerge to support these communications create infrastructure that will prove essential as the rebellion expands beyond its volcanic birthplace. As 73 BC draws toward its close, the stage is set for escalation that will test both revolutionary capabilities and Roman resolve. The success that has marked their initial operations creates momentum that demands continued expansion while attracting attention that will bring increasingly serious responses from authorities who can no longer dismiss the uprising as a minor disturbance. The transformation from escaped gladiators to revolutionary army stands complete, awaiting only the challenges that will determine whether courage and skill can overcome the vast resources that Rome can deploy against those who dare to challenge its dominion. Beyond the volcanic slopes where revolution first tasted victory, the autumn winds carry more than the scent of ripening grapes and olive harvests. They bear whispers of transformation that sweep across Campania like invisible flames, igniting hopes that have smoldered in countless hearts since childhood. Agricultural workers pause in their labors to listen for distant sounds of battle, while household servants exchange glances that speak of possibilities their masters cannot imagine. The spark that began in a gladiator school spreads through the southern territories, like wildfire consuming everything that stands in its path. The rebel force that descends from Vesuvius's protective embrace has evolved far beyond the desperate escapees who first wielded kitchen knives against their captors. 30,000 souls now march beneath standards that once belonged to Roman legions, their ranks swelling daily as communities throughout the region witness proof that resistance can achieve more than martyrdom. Veterans of the arena fight alongside agricultural workers whose only previous battles were against weeds and weather, while deserters from auxiliary units bring professional knowledge that transforms amateur courage into disciplined capability. Within this expanding army, organizational structures emerge that reflect both practical necessity and the diverse backgrounds of those who have cast their lot with revolution. Spartacus commands the overall force through a combination of demonstrated tactical brilliance and natural leadership that transcends the ethnic divisions that might otherwise fragment such a diverse coalition. His strategic vision encompasses not merely survival, but the systematic disruption of governmental authority throughout southern Italy. Yet even as unity of command provides coherence to their efforts, tensions develop that will ultimately prove as dangerous as any external enemy. Crixus, the Gallic warrior, whose hatred of Rome burns with intensity that sometimes clouds tactical judgment, advocates for aggressive campaigns that would strike directly at the heart of imperial power. His followers, drawn primarily from Celtic populations whose tribal memories include generations of conflict with Latin expansion, share his preference for bold action over cautious maneuvering. The strategic debate that emerges between these competing visions reflects fundamental questions about the rebellion's ultimate objectives. Should they seek to escape Italian territory entirely, carrying the fight to lands where governmental power remains tenuous? Or should they remain to challenge the Republic's authority directly, striking at the economic and political foundations that sustain the system of bondage? The decisions that flow from these discussions will determine not only tactical approaches, but the entire character of the uprising. Crixus advocates for the bold southern strike that will carry his name into legend while demonstrating both the potential and limitations of purely aggressive tactics. His proposal to march directly toward the prosperous cities of southern Italy appeals to followers whose desire for immediate revenge outweighs considerations of long-term strategic advantage. The plan reflects warrior traditions that value courage above calculation, honor above survival. Preparations for this ambitious campaign reveal both the organizational capabilities that the rebel army has developed and the challenges inherent in coordinating such diverse elements. Supply systems that have sustained troops operating from a single base must adapt to support mobile campaigns across hostile territory. Communication networks that functioned adequately for concentrated units require expansion to coordinate activities across multiple theaters of operation. The division of forces that results from this strategic disagreement represents both tactical necessity and political reality. Crixus leads approximately 10,000 fighters southward toward objectives that include the wealthy port cities, whose capture would provide both material rewards and symbolic victories over imperial commercial power. Spartacus retains command of the main body, his strategic focus directed toward objectives that promise greater long-term advantages for the liberation cause. This separation of commands creates immediate tactical vulnerabilities while reflecting deeper philosophical differences about the nature of their struggle. Crixus views the rebellion primarily as an opportunity for revenge against those who have perpetrated generations of injustice, his approach emphasizing dramatic gestures that will inspire fear in oppressor hearts. Spartacus considers the uprising as a systematic challenge to Roman authority that requires careful planning and coordinated execution to achieve lasting results. As rebel warfare spreads across southern Italy, the battles make clear just how far it can go and where it starts to falter. Against professional state troops, Crixus's southern offensive achieves initial successes that validate his aggressive approach while revealing the dangers inherent in operations that prioritize symbolic victories over strategic advantage. His troops sweep through prosperous agricultural regions like avenging spirits, their very presence challenging assumptions about imperial invincibility that have dominated regional politics for generations. Estates that once thrived under the presumed safety of Roman rule are suddenly vulnerable to enemies who have lived through and remember the brutal nature of plantation life. Overseers who have enforced discipline through systematic violence discover that revolution brings justice that matches their crimes. Owners who have treated human beings as agricultural implements learn that their wealth cannot purchase safety when the foundations of their authority crumble. Yet even as these tactical victories provide material benefits and psychological satisfaction, they also attract the kind of concentrated governmental response that smaller operations might have avoided. News of the devastation spreads through official channels that reach the highest levels of the administration, prompting deployment of professional legions whose capabilities far exceed those of the local militia units that have failed to contain the uprising. The Roman response that materializes to counter Crixus's offensive reflects the seriousness with which the Senate now regards what they initially dismissed as a minor disturbance. Professional legions under experienced commanders receive orders to restore imperial authority through whatever means prove necessary. The soldiers deployed for these campaigns include veterans of foreign wars, whose discipline and equipment represent the finest capabilities that the Republic can deploy. Mount Garganus, that elevated stronghold where Crixus establishes his base of operations, becomes the stage for a confrontation that will test rebel capabilities against the full weight of Roman military professionalism. The mountain's defensive advantages, while significant, cannot compensate for the numerical and technological superiority that professional legions bring to sustained siege warfare. The battle that unfolds represents more than tactical engagement. It embodies the collision between liberation, idealism, and imperial pragmatism. In the siege, you see the raw bravery of the rebels matched against the well-oiled machinery of official military strategy. Crixus's troops, inspired by their leader's fierce determination and motivated by awareness that defeat means crucifixion, fight with desperation that makes them dangerous even when facing overwhelming odds. Their knowledge of local terrain and willingness to accept casualties that would break conventional units enable resistance that prolongs the engagement far beyond expectations. Yet courage alone cannot overcome the advantages that professional organization provides when properly applied. Roman engineering capabilities that enable construction of siege works, artillery that can breach defensive positions, and logistical systems that sustain campaigns through extended periods gradually erode rebel advantages while maintaining pressure that prevents effective counterattacks. The death of Crixus marks not merely the loss of a charismatic leader, but the elimination of a strategic approach that emphasized emotional satisfaction over tactical prudence. His final charge, leading loyal followers against overwhelming odds in a gesture that epitomizes Celtic warrior traditions, achieves the kind of heroic death that inspires legends while failing to advance liberation objectives. The courage he displays in these final moments cannot compensate for the strategic errors that led to his army's destruction. News of this defeat reaches Spartacus's troops through intelligence networks that span the troubled regions, carrying with it implications that extend far beyond immediate tactical concerns. The loss of 10,000 experienced fighters represents more than numerical reduction. It eliminates the most aggressive element within the rebel coalition, while demonstrating governmental capabilities when properly concentrated and professionally directed. The funeral games that Spartacus orders to honor his fallen comrade represent both psychological necessity and liberation symbolism. 300 Roman prisoners, selected from those captured in earlier engagements, fight as gladiators in ceremonies that reverse the entertainment dynamics that characterized their former bondage. The spectacle provides emotional catharsis for fighters grieving their losses while demonstrating insurgent power to impose the same dehumanizing spectacles upon their former oppressors. These gladiatorial contests serve purposes that transcend mere revenge, creating symbolic statements about justice and power that resonate throughout the rebel ranks. Roman soldiers who once watched gladiatorial games as entertainment discover the psychological impact of becoming performers themselves, their terror and desperation providing audiences with insights into the emotions that characterized their own previous experiences in arena settings. Still, even as these ceremonies provide emotional satisfaction and symbolic victory, they also consume time and resources that more pragmatic approaches might have devoted to preparation. The elaborate nature of the funeral games reflects philosophical commitments to honor and ceremony that distinguish this revolution from purely criminal enterprises, while potentially compromising tactical advantages that speed and mobility might have provided. Simultaneously, Spartacus leads the main liberation army, so through campaigns that demonstrate the tactical sophistication that distinguishes his leadership from the more impulsive approaches that characterized other elements of the rebellion. His systematic approach to operations reflects professional training that enables maximum effectiveness from limited resources, while minimizing casualties that the cause cannot afford to sustain. Weapons manufacturing develops in hidden workshops, where rebel smiths forge blades whose edges rival anything produced in governmental arsenals. The establishment of these production facilities demonstrates organizational sophistication that transforms desperate escapees into a self-sustaining army capable of equipping new recruits with steel equal to that carried by Roman legions. The defeat of Verinius Glaber, that Roman praetor whose name becomes synonymous with incompetence, demonstrates both rebel tactical capabilities and the continued underestimation that imperial authorities bring to this conflict. The praetor's approach to suppressing the rebellion reflects assumptions about social hierarchy and effectiveness that have become dangerously obsolete in the face of professionally organized resistance. Glaber's campaign begins with confidence that reflects his own experience and the quality of soldiers under his command. The legions at his disposal include regular units whose training and equipment should provide decisive advantages over what governmental authorities continue to characterize as desperate amateurs. His strategic plan emphasizes rapid movement and concentrated strength, designed to overwhelm insurgent positions before they can organize effective resistance. The engagement that destroys this Roman expedition reveals tactical innovations that exploit both terrain advantages and enemy overconfidence. Rather than accepting battle on terms that favor conventional formations, the rebels employ mobility and local knowledge to create conditions that neutralize imperial advantages while maximizing their own capabilities. The resulting combat demonstrates that professional training, when properly applied, can overcome even significant numerical and technological disadvantages. Captured Roman standards that result from this victory provide both material and psychological benefits that extend far beyond immediate advantages. The eagles that once symbolized imperial invincibility now serve as trophies that demonstrate rebel capabilities while legitimizing claims to represent a genuine alternative to governmental authority. The sight of these symbols in insurgent hands sends messages throughout the region that challenge fundamental assumptions about military supremacy. Arms and equipment seized from defeated legions enable rebel units to upgrade their capabilities while denying resources to enemy armies. Gear designed for professional soldiers provides insurgents with tools equivalent to those their opponents employ, eliminating technological disadvantages that might otherwise prove decisive in future engagements. The systematic redistribution of captured materials demonstrates organizational sophistication that transforms battlefield victories into long-term strategic advantages. The momentum generated by these successive victories creates opportunities for expansion that carry liberation influence throughout Lucania and Campania. Communities that have endured generations of imperial domination witness practical demonstrations that resistance can achieve tangible results rather than merely heroic gestures. The psychological impact of rebel success spreads far beyond immediate battlefield consequences, inspiring hope while undermining confidence in governmental invincibility. These insurgent support networks reveal an unexpected sophistication, one that catches Roman authorities off guard, given their low expectations of rebel forces. Escaped slaves provide crucial information about troop movements and local geography, their intimate knowledge of regional conditions enabling commanders to anticipate enemy actions while coordinating their own campaigns for maximum strategic effect. Agricultural workers, whose labor sustains the regional economy, begin to question assumptions about the permanence of their bondage. Household servants, whose intimate knowledge of elite families provides intelligence capabilities, recognize opportunities that liberation success creates. Urban artisans, whose skills make them valuable to any organization, consider possibilities that alliance with rebel armies might offer. Supply systems that sustain insurgent troops during extended campaigns reflect both practical necessity and systematic planning that looks beyond immediate survival toward long-term operational requirements. Raids against imperial installations provide equipment and provisions while striking at the logistical foundations that sustain governmental efforts. Agricultural requisitions that target latifundia serve dual purposes of feeding rebel soldiers while disrupting the economic systems that generate wealth. The approach that liberation armies take towards civilian populations reveals character traits that distinguish this uprising from ordinary criminal enterprises or purely destructive rebellions. Communities that cooperate with insurgent objectives receive protection and fair treatment that contrasts sharply with the brutalities that imperial authorities often employ. Those who actively support governmental armies face consequences that reflect accumulated anger while demonstrating commitment to justice rather than indiscriminate revenge. Even as the rebels rack up wins and gain confidence, deeper strategic dilemmas arise that will eventually decide where this uprising leads. The victories achieved through superior leadership and tactical innovation have created a situation that demands decisions about ultimate objectives and long-term strategy. Should rebel armies seek to escape Italian territory entirely, carrying their struggle to regions where imperial power remains less consolidated? Or should they remain to challenge governmental authority directly within the heart of the Republic itself? The debate that develops within liberation leadership reflects both practical considerations and philosophical differences about the nature of their struggle. Escape to regions beyond governmental control offers possibilities for establishing independent communities where former slaves might live as free citizens. Direct confrontation with imperial authority provides opportunities to strike at the system that perpetuates bondage while inspiring similar uprisings throughout the Mediterranean world. Spartacus advocates for the northern march that would carry rebel armies toward Alpine passes and potential freedom beyond Roman borders. His strategic analysis emphasizes the practical limitations that prevent any slave army, however successful tactically, from ultimately defeating the full power that Rome can deploy when its fundamental interests face serious threats. Escape represents not cowardice, but practical wisdom that recognizes the difference between tactical victories and strategic objectives. Geographic factors that favor this approach include mountain terrain that provides defensive advantages while limiting governmental abilities to employ conventional formations effectively. Alpine passes that have historically served as invasion routes into Italy might equally serve as escape routes for armies seeking to establish themselves beyond imperial reach. The Celtic and Germanic populations beyond the mountains include elements that might provide support for refugees fleeing oppression. At the same time, key leaders among the rebels argue for paths that would keep pressure on the empire and spark further revolts throughout southern Italy. The momentum created by recent victories provides opportunities for inspiring similar uprisings among enslaved populations throughout the peninsula. Retreat to distant regions would abandon communities whose liberation has become possible through insurgent success. The psychological dimensions of this strategic debate reflect deeper questions about identity and ultimate purpose. Those who view the uprising primarily as an escape attempt emphasize personal freedom and individual survival over broader social transformation. Others who consider the rebellion as a systematic challenge to governmental authority argue for continued resistance that might inspire fundamental changes in official approaches to bondage and social hierarchy. As winter approaches and the rebel army faces decisions that will determine its ultimate fate, the stage is set for escalation that will test both liberation capabilities and imperial resolve. The success that has marked their campaigns throughout the autumn has created momentum that demands continued expansion while attracting attention that will bring increasingly serious responses from authorities who can no longer dismiss the uprising as a minor disturbance. The choice between northern escape and continued southern operations represents more than tactical preference. It embodies fundamental questions about purpose and achievable objectives. The decision that emerges from these deliberations will determine whether the rebellion continues as a localized uprising, seeking practical solutions, or evolves into a systematic challenge to the foundations of society itself. Spring's first breath carries more than the scent of wildflowers blooming across Italian meadows. It bears the thunder of 60,000 feet, marching northward toward horizons that promise either freedom or death. The rebel army that emerges from winter quarters moves with the coordinated precision of a weapon forged in the fires of desperation and tempered by months of victory against impossible odds. Standards that once flew over Roman legions now lead columns of former slaves whose destination lies beyond the snow-capped peaks that have guarded Italy's northern approaches since the world was young. The transformation that winter has wrought upon this unlikely force astounds even those who witnessed its birth in the blood-soaked sand of gladiator schools. What began as 70 desperate escapees wielding kitchen knives has evolved into a host whose numbers, some sources, claim exceed 90,000 souls. A fighting organization that rivals the finest legions Rome has ever fielded. Veterans of the arena march alongside agricultural workers, whose only previous battles were against weeds and weather, while deserters from auxiliary units provide the professional knowledge that transforms courage into tactical capability. Early spring campaigns that announce the multitude's resurgence demonstrate both the organizational sophistication that winter preparation has achieved and the strategic vision that guides their movements. The defeats of the consular armies under Gellius and Lentulus represent more than tactical victories. They embody systematic destruction of governmental units by insurgents that imperial authorities continue to underestimate, despite mounting evidence of their professional capabilities. These engagements reveal tactical innovations that exploit weaknesses in conventional approaches to warfare, rather than accepting battle on terms that favor traditional legionary formations. Spartacus employs mobility and terrain advantages that neutralize Roman strengths while maximizing the effectiveness of troops whose experience has taught them to fight with the desperation of those who have nothing left to lose. The resulting victories demonstrate that professional leadership, when combined with motivated fighters and superior local knowledge, can overcome even significant disadvantages in numbers and equipment. Gellius approaches the insurgent positions with confidence born of experience commanding legions in foreign campaigns, where disciplined formations have proven decisive against barbarian opponents. His strategic plan emphasizes rapid concentration of strength, designed to overwhelm revolutionary positions before they can organize effective resistance. The soldiers under his command include veteran units whose training and equipment represent the finest capabilities that the Republic can deploy. But the battle that unfolds makes it clear just how different this kind of conflict is from the usual wars fought against foreign foes. The revolutionaries refuse to cooperate with imperial tactical assumptions, employing hit-and-run attacks that prevent concentration of strength while maximizing casualties among troops trained for different forms of combat. Their intimate knowledge of local terrain enables maneuvers that keep legionary formations off balance, while creating opportunities for devastating strikes against exposed positions. The destruction of Gellius's expedition sends shockwaves through governmental political circles that extend far beyond immediate implications. Reports filtering back to the capital describe not merely tactical defeat, but systematic annihilation of legions that should have easily overwhelmed desperate amateurs. The realization that slave forces can destroy consular units challenges fundamental assumptions about social hierarchy and effectiveness that underpin the entire system. Lentulus, approaching from a different direction, with troops intended to coordinate with Gellius's advance, finds himself facing an enemy that has already demonstrated its ability to destroy professional formations. His soldiers, initially confident in their superior training and equipment, discover that previous assumptions about the nature of their opponents have become dangerously obsolete. The insurgents they encounter fight with tactical sophistication that rivals anything they have faced in foreign campaigns. The battle that eliminates Lentulus's expedition demonstrates how quickly situations can deteriorate when professional legions face opponents who refuse to fight according to conventional rules. Revolutionary columns that appear to retreat in disorder suddenly transform into coordinated attacks that strike from unexpected directions. Terrain that seems to favor imperial formations becomes a maze of ambush positions, where small groups can inflict devastating casualties on much larger units. Captured equipment from these victories provides the liberation forces with resources that enable continued expansion, while maintaining quality standards necessary for effective combat. Governmental weapons designed for professional soldiers give insurgent fighters tools equivalent to those their enemies employ, eliminating technological disadvantages that might otherwise prove decisive. The systematic redistribution of captured materials demonstrates organizational capabilities that transform battlefield success into long-term strategic advantages. These victories may boost momentum, but they also bring growing tension within the leadership over what the endgame should be and how best to reach it. The success achieved through superior tactics and inspired leadership has created opportunities that demand decisions about the rebellion's fundamental purpose. Should they seek to escape Italian territory entirely, carrying their struggle to regions where imperial power remains less consolidated? Or should they remain to challenge governmental authority directly within the heart of the Republic itself? Rebel governance that emerges to manage this massive host demonstrates administrative sophistication that rivals anything achieved by professional organizations. Supply trains that stretch for miles ensure soldiers receive adequate food and equipment regardless of battlefield conditions. Medical corps that treat wounded fighters preserve experienced veterans whose survival multiplies overall effectiveness. Camp followers that include families and support personnel transform the insurgent multitude into a mobile society capable of sustained independent existence. The logistics required to move such enormous numbers across hostile territory challenge even experienced commanders. Water sources that must supply tens of thousands of people and animals require careful planning and advanced reconnaissance. Food supplies that sustain prolonged marches must be obtained through foraging, requisition, or capture from enemy stores. Equipment maintenance that keeps weapons and gear in fighting condition demands workshops and skilled craftsmen capable of operating under field conditions. Communication systems that coordinate activities across such vast distances represent organizational achievements that exceed anything imperial authorities expect from desperate amateurs. Messages that travel between scattered detachments carry intelligence about enemy movements, while coordinating attacks that maximize strategic impact. The networks that emerge to support these communications create infrastructure that enables central control over dispersed operations. Within this mobile society, social structures develop that reflect both practical necessity and the diverse backgrounds of those who have joined the cause. Veterans of professional service assume leadership roles based on demonstrated competence, rather than hereditary privilege. Skilled craftsmen whose expertise proves valuable receive recognition and resources that enable them to contribute effectively to collective survival. Even among the formerly enslaved, hierarchies emerge based on ability and contribution rather than previous social status. The decision to attempt crossing the Alps represents both strategic calculation and philosophical commitment to objectives that transcend mere survival. Spartacus's analysis of their situation emphasizes the practical limitations that prevent any slave force, however successful tactically, from ultimately defeating the full power that Rome can deploy when its fundamental interests face serious threats. Alpine escape offers possibilities for establishing independent communities, where former bondsmen might live as free citizens beyond governmental reach. Geographic factors that influence this strategic choice include mountain terrain that has historically served as both barrier and highway between Italy and the lands beyond. The Alpine passes that once enabled Hannibal's invasion might equally serve as escape routes for forces seeking to establish themselves beyond imperial control. Celtic and Germanic populations beyond the mountains include elements that might provide support for refugees fleeing oppression. As the rebels advance toward the mountain walls that have long defended Italy, deepening internal rifts threaten to be as destructive as any foe they might face. Some fighters did make their way into Gaul, sparking internal debates that divided the movement along differing ideas of what true liberation should look like. The Alpine decision reveals fundamental philosophical differences about the rebellion's ultimate purpose. Many fighters refuse to leave Italy, viewing departure as abandonment of communities whose liberation has become possible through insurgent success. Their arguments emphasize moral obligations to continue the struggle against systems that perpetuate bondage, rather than seeking personal safety in distant lands. Gannicus, that major revolutionary leader whose name appears in fragmentary sources, emerges as a spokesman for those who advocate continued resistance within Italian territory. His strategic vision emphasizes expanding the rebellion throughout the peninsula, while inspiring similar uprisings among enslaved populations in other regions. The split that develops between his followers and those loyal to Spartacus reflects competing interpretations of duty and achievable objectives. This internal division creates tactical vulnerabilities while demonstrating the democratic character that distinguishes the rebellion from ordinary organizations. Decisions about strategic direction emerge through debate and discussion rather than autocratic command, reflecting values that prioritize collective wisdom over individual authority. The arguments that Gannicus presents for remaining in Italy include both practical and philosophical considerations. Tactically, continued operations within familiar territory offer advantages that might be lost in distant regions where local knowledge and supply sources remain unavailable. Strategically, maintaining pressure against imperial authority might inspire fundamental changes in governmental approaches to bondage and social hierarchy. More importantly, departure would abandon communities whose liberation has become possible through revolutionary success. Agricultural workers throughout southern Italy, who have provided intelligence, supplies, and recruits, deserve continued support, rather than abandonment for the sake of personal safety. The moral dimensions of this argument resonate strongly among fighters whose own experiences of abandonment make them sensitive to accusations of betraying those who have supported their cause. Spartacus counters these arguments with strategic analysis that emphasizes long-term survival over short-term tactical advantages. His assessment of imperial capabilities suggests that continued resistance within Italy must ultimately fail when governmental authorities deploy the full resources at their disposal. Recent victories, however impressive, represent tactical successes against limited legions rather than strategic defeats of power itself. The historical precedents that inform his analysis include previous slave rebellions that achieved initial success only to face devastating retaliation when authorities recognized the seriousness of the threat they represented. The Sicilian Wars demonstrated both the potential for successful resistance and the ultimate consequences of challenging authority within territories that Rome considers essential to its survival. Geographic considerations also favor the Alpine escape route. Mountain terrain that provides defensive advantages might enable small groups to maintain independence even when facing superior numbers. The Celtic and Germanic populations beyond the Alps include elements that have successfully resisted expansion, suggesting possibilities for alliances that might provide security for refugee communities. As the internal debate intensifies, the practical result is a division of forces that weakens both factions while creating opportunities for governmental responses. Those who choose to cross the Alps with Spartacus maintain coherent command structure and clear strategic objectives. Those who remain with Gannicus face the challenge of continuing operations without the leadership and organizational capabilities that have enabled previous successes. The crossing itself, for those who undertake it, represents one of the most remarkable achievements in history, moving tens of thousands of people and animals across mountain terrain that challenges even small, well-equipped expeditions, requires organizational capabilities that exceed anything accomplished by conventional legions. The logistics of feeding, housing, and protecting such enormous numbers while traversing hostile territory demonstrate administrative sophistication that rivals the finest achievements of professional organizations. Weather conditions that prevail during the crossing create additional challenges that test the determination and endurance of fighters, whose commitment to freedom has already survived trials that would have broken ordinary individuals. Alpine storms that bring snow and freezing temperatures threaten the lives of people equipped primarily for Mediterranean climates. Terrain that includes narrow paths along precipitous cliffs requires careful movement that becomes treacherous when weather conditions deteriorate. Even as some elements of the host achieve the crossing and establish themselves in territories beyond imperial control, the larger strategic situation continues to deteriorate for those who remain in Italy. The splintering of command that results from the Alpine decision creates tactical vulnerabilities that governmental commanders can exploit through divide-and-conquer strategies. Roman political responses to the rebellion's continued success reflect the growing seriousness with which authorities regard what they initially dismissed as a minor disturbance. The Senate's decision to grant extraordinary command to Marcus Licinius Crassus represents recognition that conventional approaches have failed to contain a threat that challenges fundamental assumptions about social stability and effectiveness. Crassus himself embodies the transformation of responses from casual dismissal to systematic determination. This wealthy patrician with personal political ambitions recognizes that success against the revolutionaries offers opportunities for glory that might elevate his status within the competitive hierarchy of Republican politics. His willingness to pay for the campaign from his own resources demonstrates both personal commitment and confidence in ultimate victory. The legions that Crassus assembles for his campaign represent the finest capabilities that Rome can deploy against internal threats. Professional units whose training and equipment exceed anything the insurgents have previously faced receive assignments that emphasize systematic suppression rather than quick tactical victories. The commanders appointed to serve under him include veterans of foreign campaigns, whose experience encompasses the full range of challenges that professional forces might encounter. Most ominously for revolutionary prospects, Crassus revives decimation, that brutal punishment where every 10th man in units that flee from battle faces execution by his comrades. This demonstration of iron discipline sends clear messages about the standards expected from troops serving under his command, while eliminating any possibility that soldiers might consider retreat when facing determined resistance. The systematic character of Crassus's approach reflects lessons learned from previous failures against insurgent troops. Rather than seeking quick victories through conventional battles, his strategy emphasizes attrition warfare that exploits advantages in resources and logistics while minimizing revolutionary opportunities to achieve the kind of tactical surprises that have characterized their previous successes. Intelligence networks that support the new campaign demonstrate capabilities that previous commanders had neglected to develop. Spies who penetrate revolutionary territories provide information about internal divisions and strategic debates that enable governmental units to exploit weaknesses they might not otherwise have discovered. Communication systems that coordinate activities across multiple theaters ensure that responses can adapt quickly to changing tactical situations. Supply systems that sustain Crassus's legions during extended operations reflect organizational capabilities that previous campaigns had failed to employ effectively. Logistics that provide adequate food, water, and equipment, regardless of battlefield conditions, enable troops to maintain operational effectiveness through prolonged engagements. Medical facilities that treat wounded soldiers preserve experienced fighters whose survival contributes to overall effectiveness. As the year 72 progresses toward its conclusion, the stage is set for confrontations that will test both revolutionary capabilities and imperial determination in ways that previous engagements have not. The organizational sophistication that both sides have developed through months of conflict has created capabilities that exceed anything previously deployed in internal warfare. The strategic decisions that emerge from current circumstances will determine whether the rebellion continues as a significant challenge to authority or faces the systematic suppression that superior resources and professional organization can provide. The choices made during this crucial period will define not only the immediate fate of the liberation host, but the broader implications of their struggle for social justice and human dignity. The Alps, silent witnesses to their crossing, stand in awe of a feat few believed possible. But the road ahead holds greater trials, where only unwavering courage can hope to stand against the full force of an empire unwilling to be challenged. The autumn winds that sweep across the Italian peninsula carry more than the scent of harvest and dying leaves. They bear the methodical thunder of professional legions whose commander understands that this rebellion must be crushed, not through heroic gestures, but through systematic application of Roman military science. Marcus Licinius Crassus moves across the landscape like a chess master, positioning pieces for checkmate. His every decision calculated to transform insurgent advantages into fatal disadvantages. Gone are the days when governmental responses reflected aristocratic disdain for desperate slaves. Now Rome sends killers whose expertise has been forged in the crucibles of foreign wars. When the stakes are high, the Republic doesn't hold back. Crassus commands its best forces in the fight against the revolutionary host. 8 full legions, totaling nearly 40,000 professional soldiers, march under commanders whose experience encompasses every form of warfare known to the ancient world. Veterans of campaigns in Spain and Asia bring knowledge of siegecraft, field engineering, and logistics that previous expeditions against the rebels had conspicuously lacked. It's not numbers or equipment that matter most now. It's the sharper, more deliberate approach to how the war is being fought. Where earlier commanders had sought quick victories through conventional battles, Crassus embraces a methodical campaign of attrition designed to exploit Roman advantages, while denying insurgents the tactical surprises that had characterized their previous successes. His war plan reflects systematic analysis of revolutionary capabilities and weaknesses, gathered through months of intelligence collection and careful study of earlier defeats. The psychological dimension of this new approach becomes apparent through policies that demonstrate iron determination to restore governmental authority regardless of cost. Decimation, that brutal punishment where every 10th man in units that flee from battle faces execution by his comrades, sends clear messages about standards expected from troops serving under his command. The revival of this ancient practice signals that retreat will bring death more certainly than advance into enemy weapons. His tactical moves show how conventional Roman warfare is being bent and retooled to counter the specific threats posed by the insurgents. Rather than attempting to engage the revolutionary army in pitched battles where their desperation and mobility provide advantages, his strategy emphasizes cutting supply lines while avoiding direct confrontation that might enable enemy strengths to influence outcomes. The result resembles siege warfare extended across entire regions, rather than focused on individual fortifications. Crassus's tactical innovations demonstrate sophisticated understanding of irregular warfare principles. His use of auxiliary troops drawn from allied populations provides knowledge of local terrain and customs that pure Roman units lack. Engineering capabilities that enable rapid construction of fortifications transform temporary camps into permanent bases that project governmental control across contested territories. Most importantly, disciplined coordination between multiple columns prevents insurgents from concentrating forces against isolated detachments. Intelligence networks that support these operations represent organizational achievements that exceed anything previous commanders had attempted. Spies who penetrate revolutionary territories provide detailed information about internal divisions, supply difficulties, and strategic debates that enable governmental forces to exploit weaknesses they might not otherwise discover. Communication systems that coordinate activities across multiple theaters ensure that Roman responses adapt quickly to changing tactical situations. The campaign that unfolds reveals both the potential and limitations of systematic approaches to suppressing popular uprisings. Crassus's methodical advance succeeds in restricting insurgent mobility while denying access to the agricultural resources that sustain large armies in the field. His engineering capabilities enable construction of supply bases and fortified positions that provide secure foundations for extended operations in hostile territory. But the rebel forces now confronting this threat are a far cry from the desperate fugitives who first defied Roman power. Spartacus commands an army whose organizational sophistication rivals that of professional legions, while his tactical innovations reflect military experience gained through months of successful campaigns. The collision between these forces represents more than governmental suppression of criminal activity. It embodies systematic warfare between professional military organizations, employing the finest techniques available to their respective traditions. Initial contacts between the opposing armies demonstrate how profoundly the nature of this conflict has evolved since its chaotic beginnings. Revolutionary forces that attempt to employ hit-and-run tactics against Crassus's columns discover that professional military science has adapted to counter their preferred methods. Roman formations that advance with careful coordination and systematic reconnaissance prove difficult to surprise or outmaneuver through the improvisational approaches that had proven effective against earlier commanders. The siege of Petelia represents the first major test of revolutionary capabilities against systematic Roman military engineering. Here, where Spartacus attempts to establish defensive positions that might enable his army to survive sustained assault, the collision between insurgent determination and professional expertise creates conditions that reveal the ultimate limitations facing any popular uprising against established governmental power. Petelia's strategic importance lies not merely in its defensive potential, but in its position controlling access routes that the revolutionary army requires for continued operations. Crassus recognizes that capturing this stronghold will force insurgent commanders to choose between abandoning their defensive advantages or accepting battle on terms that favor conventional military formations. Either outcome serves governmental interests by eliminating tactical advantages that have enabled previous revolutionary successes. The battle that unfolds at Petelia demonstrates both the courage that drives insurgent fighters and the systematic efficiency that characterizes professional military operations. Revolutionary forces, inspired by awareness that defeat means crucifixion, fight with desperation that makes them dangerous even when facing overwhelming odds. Their knowledge of local terrain and willingness to accept casualties that would break conventional units enable resistance that prolongs engagements far beyond Roman expectations. However, courage alone cannot overcome advantages that professional military organization provides when properly applied. Roman engineering capabilities that enable construction of siege works, artillery that can breach defensive positions, and logistical systems that sustain operations through extended campaigns gradually erode revolutionary advantages while maintaining pressure that prevents effective counterattacks. The breakthrough that Crassus achieves at Petelia costs thousands of insurgent lives, while demonstrating governmental capabilities when properly concentrated and professionally directed. Revolutionary casualties that result from this engagement represent more than numerical losses. They eliminate experienced fighters whose survival had multiplied overall army effectiveness. The psychological impact of systematic defeat begins to erode morale that had sustained the rebellion through previous trials. Still, even as tactical defeat forces revolutionary withdrawal from defensive positions Spartacus demonstrates strategic thinking that enables his army to survive encounters that might have destroyed less professionally led organizations. The breakout that follows Petilia's fall reflects careful planning and disciplined execution that preserve the rebellion's core elements while avoiding total destruction that Roman commanders had anticipated. The decision to march southward toward coastal regions represents both strategic calculation and desperate necessity. Spartacus's analysis of their situation emphasizes that continued operations within Italy must ultimately fail when governmental authorities can deploy unlimited resources against forces whose numbers and supplies remain finite. Escape by sea offers possibilities that land routes no longer provide. Geographic factors that influence this strategic choice include coastal terrain that historically has provided access to maritime escape routes. Cilician pirates whose activities throughout the Mediterranean have created networks capable of transporting large numbers of people might provide services that enable revolutionary forces to establish themselves beyond Roman control. The prospect of reaching Sicily, where previous slave rebellions had achieved temporary success, offers psychological as well as practical advantages. Negotiations with Cilician pirates reveal both the desperation that drives revolutionary strategy and the practical limitations that constrain all military operations dependent upon external support. The Cilician pirate betrayal represents more than commercial transaction failure. It embodies systematic isolation that results when established powers coordinate responses against common threats. His agreement with the Cilician pirates reflects more than desperation. It shows real knowledge of how to navigate both the sea and the market. The agreement to transport 2,000 fighters to Sicily in exchange for substantial payment reflects careful calculation of available resources and strategic priorities. The selection of personnel for this evacuation reveals command decisions that prioritize preserving leadership capabilities over maximizing numbers. The betrayal that follows makes one thing clear. Outcomes can hinge on outside events, no matter how prepared or capable the revolutionaries are. Cilician pirates who accept payment while failing to provide promised transportation reveal the fundamental isolation that faces any uprising, challenging established governmental authority. The gold that disappears with departing ships represents not merely financial loss, but elimination of strategic options that had offered hope for survival. The trap that results from this betrayal transforms Spartacus's southern march from calculated retreat into desperate flight toward terrain that offers defensive possibilities while limiting options for continued operations. Bruttium, that mountainous peninsula whose geography provides natural barriers against pursuit, becomes both sanctuary and prison for revolutionary forces whose strategic choices have narrowed to immediate survival. Crassus's response to this strategic development demonstrates professional military thinking that recognizes opportunities while avoiding complications that might enable enemy escape. Rather than pursuing insurgent forces into terrain that favors defenders, his engineering capabilities enable construction of fortifications that seal escape routes while maintaining governmental forces in positions that maximize their advantages. The wall that Crassus constructs across the Bruttium Peninsula represents one of Rome's largest military engineering projects, a 37-mile fortification complete with trenches, palisades, and watchtowers that transforms natural geography into systematic imprisonment. The technical achievement that this construction represents rivals anything accomplished by Roman military engineers in foreign campaigns, while its strategic purpose reflects understanding of siege warfare principles adapted to regional rather than urban applications. Engineering knowledge that enables this massive undertaking includes surveying techniques that ensure proper alignment across difficult terrain, construction methods that create durable fortifications using locally available materials, and logistical planning that supplies thousands of workers with tools and provisions throughout extended building periods. The coordination required between multiple work crews demonstrates organizational capabilities that exceed anything revolutionary forces can match. The psychological impact of this fortification extends beyond its physical barriers to represent systematic demonstration of governmental determination to restore authority regardless of cost. Revolutionary fighters who witness the wall's construction understand that escape routes are disappearing, while Roman resources remain adequate to sustain siege operations indefinitely. The sight of systematic engineering progress creates despair that no amount of tactical success can overcome. Winter campaign conditions that prevail during the siege create additional challenges that test endurance and determination of both forces. Cold weather that brings snow and freezing temperatures threatens lives of people equipped primarily for Mediterranean climates. Food shortages that result from restricted foraging opportunities force difficult decisions about resource allocation that affect army cohesion. Supply difficulties that face revolutionary forces trapped within the Bruttium Peninsula reflect systematic success of Crassus's strategy. Agricultural resources that sustain large armies require access to productive regions that the wall now denies. Hunting and foraging that might supplement agricultural supplies become inadequate when thousands of people compete for limited resources within restricted territory. Overcrowding and poor nutrition spark medical crises that endanger the army's survival, even in the absence of battle. Diseases that spread through camps where sanitation systems cannot handle population concentrations weaken fighters, while consuming resources needed for military operations. The systematic deterioration of living conditions demonstrates how siege warfare can achieve strategic objectives without requiring costly battles. Despite the physical decline, the movement's leadership displays a sense of purpose and organization that marks this as something far more than a criminal venture. Discipline that maintains order, despite desperate circumstances, reflects institutional structures that have evolved through months of successful military operations. Morale that survives systematic pressure demonstrates commitment to ideals that transcend immediate personal survival. Multiple breakout attempts that test Roman defensive capabilities reveal both revolutionary determination and the practical limitations that constrain all military operations. Insurgent forces that probe fortification weaknesses discover systematic professional responses that eliminate tactical advantages while maintaining strategic containment. The failure of these efforts demonstrates how thoroughly governmental forces have adapted to counter-revolutionary capabilities. Skirmishes that occur along fortification lines create casualties that both forces can ill afford, while failing to achieve decisive results that might change strategic circumstances. Revolutionary fighters who sacrifice themselves in desperate attacks against prepared positions demonstrate courage that cannot compensate for tactical disadvantages that systematic engineering has created. Roman soldiers who defend fortified positions face enemies whose desperation makes them dangerous, even when tactical success seems impossible. Desertion that begins among revolutionary forces reflects psychological pressure that systematic siege warfare creates more effectively than battlefield defeats. Fighters who join the rebellion seeking freedom discover that their situation has become more desperate than the bondage they sought to escape. The gradual erosion of army strength through departures represents strategic success that Crassus achieves without requiring costly military victories. Still, the breakout that works in the end reveals not just the rebels' enduring battlefield instincts, but also the flaws in siege warfare that no amount of planning can erase. Spartacus's escape with substantial forces reflects planning and execution that preserve rebellion capabilities despite months of systematic pressure. The conditions under which this breakout occurs reveal both revolutionary resourcefulness and the inherent difficulties that face any besieging army attempting to maintain perfect control over extended perimeters. Weather conditions that reduce visibility provide opportunities that careful planning can exploit. Defensive preparations that create gaps in surveillance enable coordinated action that achieves tactical surprise despite strategic containment. Though the rebels manage to avoid destruction, their advantage fades fast as state forces recalibrate and tighten their grip. The loss of coherent organization that results from prolonged siege warfare creates internal divisions that multiply tactical vulnerabilities while reducing overall effectiveness. As winter yields to spring and the campaign enters its final phase, the stage is set for confrontations that will determine whether revolutionary determination can overcome systematic governmental responses, or whether professional military organization will achieve the suppression that Roman authority demands. The forces that emerge from the Brutium siege carry with them both the experience of survival against impossible odds and the awareness that their options for continued resistance have narrowed to desperate measures whose success depends upon factors beyond their control. The Silurus exhales a ghostly veil, reminiscent of dying gods, while two armies prepare to learn whether boldness can shift the balance against overwhelming odds. 40,000 Republican legionaries stretch across the landscape in formations that speak of professional discipline perfected through generations of conquest, their bronze eagles catching the first light, while centurions bark orders that have echoed across 100 battlefields from Gaul to Asia. Across the narrow waters, 30,000 souls who have nothing left to lose but their chains arrange themselves in battle lines that mirror the very formations they once faced as gladiators, performing for crowds that cheered their deaths. Yet these are no longer entertainment slaves dying for Roman amusement. They have become an army whose survival has depended upon adapting every lesson that professional warfare can teach. The Thracian who commands them understands that this day will witness either the birth of legend or the death of hope. Spartacus moves among his warriors with the calm authority of one who has accepted that destiny cannot be avoided, only faced with dignity. His physical presence bears the scars of countless engagements, arena combat that taught him to kill with artistry, auxiliary service that showed him how armies move and fight, months of command that transformed desperate escapees into disciplined soldiers. The horse beneath him, a magnificent beast seized from some patrician's stable, paws the earth as if eager to carry its rider toward whatever fate awaits beyond the river. The decision that he makes in these final moments speaks to character forged in fires that have tested every assumption about human nature and divine justice. Rather than mount this splendid animal for his final charge, the commander slides from its back and draws his sword with movements that carry the fluid grace of an arena professional. The blade that flashes in morning light finds the horse's heart with surgical precision, sending the magnificent creature to earth in a gesture that renders retreat impossible, while declaring that victory or death are the only acceptable outcomes. Today, we win a better mount, he tells warriors, whose eyes reflect their own understanding of what this day must bring, or we need none at all. The words carry across ranks that include Gauls, whose ancestors fought Caesar, Germans whose tribes once raided across the Rhine, Thracians whose homeland has known Roman boots for generations, and Greeks whose education exceeds that of their former masters. Each man understands that the river before them marks the boundary between hope and despair, between freedom and crucifixion. Battle formations that deploy across the field reflect tactical sophistication that months of successful campaigns have developed. Spartacus adapts Roman military doctrine to circumstances that no manual has ever addressed, creating hybrid strategies that blend conventional approaches with innovations born from desperate necessity. His knowledge of republican tactics, gained through auxiliary service in distant provinces, enables anticipation of enemy movements, while his gladiatorial experience provides understanding of individual combat that multiplies unit effectiveness. The center holds veterans of the original breakout, fighters whose survival through countless engagements has proven their worth beyond question. These are the souls who wielded kitchen knives against gladiator school guards, who rappelled down Vesuvius's cliffs on vine ropes, who stood firm when professional legions tried to break their lines through conventional assault. Their weapons bear the nicks and scratches of battles that have transformed desperation into competence, fear into fury. Flanking positions receive troops whose backgrounds provide specialized capabilities adapted to their assigned roles. Celtic warriors whose tribal traditions emphasize individual heroism occupy sectors where personal courage can influence outcomes through aggressive action. Germanic fighters whose knowledge of unconventional warfare enables them to exploit terrain advantages that conventional formations might overlook. Syrian and Greek contingents whose education includes understanding of siegecraft and engineering contribute expertise that enhances overall tactical capability. Across the river, Crassus arranges his legions with the methodical precision of an engineer solving mathematical problems. 8 full units representing the finest military capabilities that the Republic can deploy when its fundamental interests face serious threats. Veterans of Spanish campaigns, where they learned to fight in broken terrain. Survivors of Asian wars, where they mastered siegecraft and logistics. Professional soldiers, whose entire lives have been devoted to perfecting the arts of organized violence. The psychological dimension of this confrontation transcends mere tactical considerations to embody fundamental questions about the nature of justice and the relationship between power and righteousness. Republican officers who observe the enemy deployments see only escaped slaves whose temporary success cannot overcome the natural order that assigns each person their proper place in society. They anticipate victory, not merely because they command superior numbers, but because they represent civilization itself against the forces of chaos and disorder. Even as officials cling to their narrative, the insurgents across the water have become something far stronger than the desperate fugitives they're made out to be. These fighters have created their own civilization in the crucible of constant warfare, developing institutions and values that demonstrate human dignity transcends accidents of birth or legal status. Their courage springs not from ignorance of consequences, but from clear understanding that some things matter more than mere survival. Weather conditions that prevail on this morning create atmospheric effects that seem charged with significance beyond meteorological explanation. Mist that rises from river waters obscures visibility while muffling sounds in ways that make the approaching collision feel like an encounter between ghostly armies, rather than flesh and blood opponents. The very air seems heavy with anticipation, as if nature itself holds its breath, awaiting outcomes that will echo through ages yet to come. Intelligence networks that have served both sides throughout this campaign provide final reports that influence tactical decisions and psychological preparation. Spies who penetrate enemy camps return with assessments of morale, equipment condition, and leadership capabilities that enable commanders to adapt their approaches based on current circumstances rather than outdated assumptions. Communication systems that coordinate multiple units ensure that orders reach their destinations despite battlefield chaos that typically disrupts command effectiveness. Supply considerations that affect both armies reflect the systematic nature of this final confrontation. Legionary logistics that provide adequate food, water, and equipment, regardless of battlefield conditions, enable Republican troops to maintain operational effectiveness through prolonged engagement. Insurgent resourcefulness that has sustained operations despite systematic governmental efforts to deny access to traditional supply sources demonstrates organizational capabilities that have enabled survival against impossible odds. The engagement begins not with dramatic cavalry charges or thunderous artillery bombardments, but with the methodical advance of professional infantry formations whose discipline has been perfected through generations of systematic warfare. Republican centurions, whose voices have commanded obedience on battlefields from Britain to Babylon, lead units that move with mechanical precision toward objectives that tactical doctrine has predetermined based on terrain analysis and enemy capabilities. What happens next is no ordinary fight. It reveals just how far this war stands, apart from conventional military showdowns. The insurgent fighters who meet this advance bring desperation that transforms individual combat effectiveness, while their knowledge of Republican tactical methods enables anticipation of enemy movements that conventional opponents might not possess. The result is engagement that combines the systematic brutality of professional warfare with emotional intensity that elevates violence to levels that exceed normal military experience. Spartacus leads his warriors into this maelstrom with the focused intensity of one who understands that personal survival matters less than the example that courage can provide for future generations. His advance toward the Republican center reflects strategic thinking that seeks to eliminate enemy command capabilities, while demonstrating leadership that inspires followers to achievements beyond their normal capabilities. The path that his sword cuts through enemy ranks becomes a corridor of destruction that threatens to split legionary formations despite their numerical advantages. Two centurions, whose careers have included service in the most dangerous theaters of Republican expansion, find themselves facing an opponent whose skill transcends anything their experience has prepared them to counter. These are professional soldiers whose survival through countless engagements reflects competence earned through systematic training and battlefield experience. Yet the fury that drives their enemy exceeds anything they have encountered in conventional military service. The duels that follow demonstrate both the tactical sophistication that gladiatorial schools provided and the desperate courage that fighting for fundamental principles can inspire. Spartacus employs techniques that blend arena artistry with battlefield pragmatism, his movements reflecting years of practice against opponents whose survival depended upon matching his skill. The centurions who fall to his blade represent more than tactical victories. They embody symbolic triumph of human dignity over systematic oppression. But while acts of heroism lead to brief tactical wins, the cold logic of numbers starts to take over as the enemy's overwhelming force grinds them down. Republican reserves that enter the fighting maintain fresh strength against enemies whose endurance has limits despite their desperate motivation. Systematic coordination between multiple legionary units prevents the kind of breakthrough that might enable insurgent forces to achieve strategic success despite numerical disadvantages. The charge that carries the Thracian toward Crassus himself represents both tactical calculation and philosophical statement about the nature of leadership and personal responsibility. Rather than preserving himself for potential escape, while subordinates bear the burden of combat, He seeks direct confrontation with the enemy commander, whose systematic approach has brought the rebellion to this desperate extremity. The gesture embodies principles that distinguish this uprising from ordinary criminal enterprises or purely destructive rebellions. Fighting that swirls around the Republican command position demonstrates how individual actions can influence outcomes, even when broader strategic circumstances appear predetermined. Spartacus cuts through protective formations with techniques that reflect every lesson that professional military service can teach. His advance creating opportunities for followers whose courage enables them to exploit tactical advantages that superior leadership provides. While Crassus is well defended, what really stands out is the depth of the institution behind him, strong enough to absorb serious setbacks and keep going. Guard units whose sole responsibility involves command protection possess equipment and training that exceed normal legionary standards, while their psychological preparation emphasizes duty over personal survival in ways that mirror insurgent motivation while serving opposite purposes. The melee that engulfs this crucial sector of the battlefield creates conditions where individual skill and courage can achieve results that strategic planning cannot guarantee. Bodies that fall around the Republican standards include both veteran legionaries, whose careers spanned decades of professional service, and insurgent fighters whose lives began in bondage, but achieved dignity through choosing how their stories would end. In this chaos of clashing steel and dying warriors, Spartacus disappears into legend as surely as he vanishes from historical record. The circumstances of his death remain shrouded in uncertainty that reflects both the confusion of battlefield conditions and the symbolic importance that his fate acquired for participants and observers alike. Whether he falls to overwhelming numbers while fighting toward his ultimate objective, or whether his body becomes so mangled in the general slaughter that identification proves impossible, the result serves purposes that transcend mere tactical considerations. The body mystery that emerges from this final engagement reflects systematic Roman efforts to deny insurgent followers the psychological comfort that martyrdom might provide. Republican authorities who desperately search for physical remains understand that visible proof of enemy leader destruction might prevent the kind of legendary status that could inspire future uprisings. The failure to locate identifiable remains creates ambiguity that serves neither side's propaganda requirements, while enabling historical speculation that continues across centuries. Systematic slaughter that follows the collapse of insurgent resistance reveals the savage vengeance that awaits those who dare challenge Republican authority at its foundations. Tens of thousands of fighters who survived months of professional warfare against impossible odds face destruction that exceeds normal battlefield casualties to become comprehensive elimination of everyone associated with the rebellion. The killing continues long after military resistance ceases, driven by governmental determination to send messages about the consequences of challenging established order. 6,000 crucifixions that line the Appian Way from Capua to Rome represent more than punishment for specific crimes. They embody systematic demonstration of Republican power, designed to discourage future challenges to governmental authority. The bodies that hang along this major thoroughfare include not merely active combatants, but anyone whose association with the rebellion made them suspect in official eyes. Agricultural workers who provided supplies, urban artisans who manufactured equipment, even household servants whose loyalty appeared questionable, all find themselves subjected to execution methods designed to maximize suffering while providing visible warnings. The corpses that remain exposed along the roadway for months serve purposes that extend beyond immediate deterrence to create lasting psychological impact on populations that might otherwise consider resistance to established authority. Travelers who journey between the capital and southern territories must pass these reminders of what happens to those who choose rebellion over submission. The systematic nature of this display demonstrates governmental capacity for comprehensive retaliation that makes individual acts of defiance appear futile. Republican force may win the day and crush resistance for now, but it leaves behind a tangle of unresolved issues that force alone can't untangle. News of the crucifixion spreads throughout Mediterranean regions, where enslaved populations vastly outnumber their masters, carrying with it awareness that courage can challenge even the mightiest empires, while inspiring respect for those who choose death over continued bondage. Pompey's arrival from Spanish campaigns creates political complications that transform military victory into governmental embarrassment, despite tactical success that exceeded all reasonable expectations. This ambitious commander, whose reputation rests upon achievements in foreign wars, recognizes opportunities that the rebellion's suppression provides for advancing his own career at Crassus's expense. His forces encounter scattered survivors, whose capture enables claims to have ended the uprising, despite arriving after decisive engagements had already concluded. The political maneuvering that follows demonstrates how military success can become diplomatic failure when ambitious commanders compete for credit rather than cooperating to serve broader governmental interests. Pompey's theft of recognition that rightfully belongs to Crassus creates tensions within Republican leadership that will influence political developments for years to come. The irony that systematic military competence receives less reward than opportunistic self-promotion reflects institutional weaknesses that will contribute to the Republic's eventual transformation. Reports that reach the Senate describe not merely tactical victory over desperate criminals, but systematic warfare against organized opposition that challenged fundamental assumptions about Roman military invincibility. The resources required to achieve suppression, 8 full legions commanded by experienced generals operating through extended campaigns, demonstrate that this uprising represented serious threats rather than minor disturbances that local authorities should have contained through routine police actions. Economic consequences that flow from the rebellion's suppression include both immediate costs and long-term implications that affect Republican finances and social policy for generations. The expense of maintaining professional armies in extended operations against internal enemies drains resources that might otherwise support foreign expansion or domestic improvements. More significantly, the destruction of tens of thousands of valuable human property creates labor shortages that affect agricultural production throughout southern Italy. What unfolds here doesn't just impact military or political spheres. It reshapes broader cultural attitudes and leaves a lasting mark on institutions throughout the region. The demonstration that enslaved populations can organize effective military resistance despite systematic efforts to prevent coordination creates awareness among both masters and bondsmen that existing arrangements rest upon foundations less secure than previous generations had assumed. For those still in bondage, the psychological legacy of the uprising lingers, beyond the reach of brute force or official narratives. Stories that preserve the memory of achievements against impossible odds provide inspiration that transcends immediate circumstances, while demonstrating possibilities that systematic oppression cannot entirely destroy. The legend that grows from historical reality becomes more powerful than facts themselves in shaping future expectations and aspirations. As the year 71 BC draws toward its close, and Republican authorities congratulate themselves on restoring order to territories that had briefly known the chaos of liberation. The stage is set for transformations that will reshape not merely Italian society, but the entire structure of Mediterranean civilization. The seeds that this rebellion has planted in soil, fertilized by the blood of martyrs, will germinate in ways that no amount of governmental vigilance can prevent, creating possibilities that exceed anything the original participants imagined when they first seized kitchen knives and dreamed of freedom. The silence that settles over battlefields where courage confronted overwhelming odds carries within it echoes that will resonate through centuries yet to come, reminding future generations that human dignity cannot be permanently suppressed, and that the struggle for justice transcends individual lifespans to become eternal testimony to values that survive even when their champions fall. Dust settles over battlefields where eagles have reclaimed their ancient supremacy. Yet something lingers in the Italian air that no amount of governmental victory can dispel entirely. The republic that emerges from this trial bears scars invisible to casual observers, psychological wounds that will fester beneath the surface of restored order, like infections, resisting all attempts at healing. Rome has proven once again that superior resources must ultimately triumph over desperate courage, yet the very need for such overwhelming force reveals vulnerabilities that thoughtful observers cannot ignore. Marcus Licinius Crassus returns to the capital, bearing laurels that taste of ash despite their public splendor. His systematic suppression represents competence of the highest order, yet political rivals who arrived after decisive engagements concluded claim credit that rightfully belongs to those who bore combat's burden. Pompey's theft of recognition creates tensions between powerful figures whose cooperation the Republic requires for continued stability, demonstrating how military success can become diplomatic failure when ambitious commanders prioritize personal advancement over collective interests. In the Senate House, where marble columns have witnessed generations of debate, voices now carry undertones of unease that previous speakers never knew. Senators whose ancestors never doubted their natural right to command obedience confront evidence that systematic resistance can challenge even the mightiest empire when properly organized. The resources required to achieve victory, 8 full legions operating through extended campaigns, demonstrate that internal threats can demand attention previously reserved for foreign enemies. Agricultural estates throughout southern Italy bear witness to transformations that extend far beyond immediate battlefield casualties. Where once 30,000 souls labored in fields and workshops, silence now stretches across landscapes that struggling owners attempt to restore, with replacement workers drawn from fresh conquests. Yet new arrivals cannot immediately match the skills and local knowledge that systematic elimination destroyed, creating inefficiencies that ripple through regional economies for generations. In patrician villas, where household servants move through familiar routines, masters who previously slept soundly now recognize that their safety depends upon vigilance rather than assumed superiority. Conversations halt when certain topics arise, while glances carry meanings that would have seemed impossible before recent events proved that kitchen knives could become instruments of liberation. The comfortable dominance that defined social relationships for centuries has transformed into anxious supervision that consumes energy previously devoted to expansion and enrichment. Gladiator schools that once operated with casual security now bristle with guards whose numbers exceed those of their charges. New regulations impose oversight, designed to prevent future concentrations of trained fighters in single locations, while restrictions on movement and assembly acknowledge organizational capabilities that the uprising demonstrated. These measures reflect official recognition that existing arrangements had contained weaknesses, which thoughtful planning might have exploited more effectively than desperate improvisation. Institutional reactions may be swift, but they're no match for the deeper problems that resist easy resolution. Memory of achievements against impossible odds survives in hearts where no amount of legislation can reach, while stories preserving heroic examples provide inspiration transcending immediate circumstances. Authority that once rested upon assumptions of natural superiority now requires active maintenance, consuming resources and attention previously devoted to profitable activities. Throughout the peninsula, networks of watchers monitor conversations in workshops where artisans labor under supervision intensified by recent experiences. Market squares that once rang with casual chatter now echo with careful words. Their speakers, aware that ears attuned to sedition, listen from shadows. The administrative apparatus needed to process intelligence reports represents overhead costs reducing overall efficiency, while the psychological atmosphere that systematic monitoring creates transforms social relationships in ways that undermine the casual authority previous generations enjoyed. Urban workshops implement supervision monitoring, not only productivity, but also associations that might indicate dangerous tendencies. Educational opportunities that previously served practical purposes now require official approval, designed to ensure that knowledge serves only authorized functions. These limitations create their own inefficiencies by constraining human potential that might otherwise contribute to economic growth and cultural advancement. Professional armies that suppress the uprising incorporate lessons learned into training programs, preparing units for internal security operations. Command structures coordinating multiple theaters receive attention designed to prevent delays and confusion that enabled early insurgent successes. Officer education now includes counterinsurgency doctrine, reflecting recognition that future conflicts may involve opponents employing tactics similar to those proving effective during recent campaigns. In lamplit chambers, where scholars bend over papyrus scrolls, writers struggle to capture the impossible. How kitchen slaves became generals, how desperate escapees forged armies that shattered legions. Their styluses hesitate over words, explaining what established wisdom insists cannot happen, forcing creation of new language for achievements transcending familiar boundaries. Sculptural works commemorating governmental victory include subtle acknowledgments of enemy courage that reflect genuine respect for valor displayed despite hopeless circumstances. Mystery cults gathering in hidden chambers find their promises of salvation, regardless of social status, resonating among populations whose recent experiences challenged assumptions about natural hierarchy. Christian assemblies, meeting in secret, discover their message of universal dignity, suddenly urgent among hearts, remembering when slaves commanded and masters begged for mercy. The transformation of consciousness, that exposure to liberation, ideals produced continues operating even after physical suppression eliminated organized resistance. Foreign governments, whose security depends upon maintaining control over potentially insurgent populations, study tactical methods and institutional responses, proving effective during recent campaigns. Commercial networks resuming following restored order implement precautions designed to prevent future disruptions that rebellion temporarily created. These adaptations represent hidden costs, affecting competitiveness and growth potential throughout affected regions. What followed was more than just destruction. Long-term social transformations unfolded as a result of the sustained crackdown. Abandoned settlements indicate population displacement continuing long after active resistance ended, while burial sites containing mass graves reflect casualty scales that final battles created. Workshops where weapons were manufactured, and storage facilities where supplies accumulated provide insights into organizational sophistication, exceeding contemporary governmental expectations. Construction projects undertaken following restoration include fortifications, preventing future concentrations of dangerous populations, road improvements, facilitating rapid troop movement, and public buildings, housing expanded administrative apparatus. These infrastructure developments represent permanent changes that recent experiences imposed upon priorities and resource allocation, creating visible reminders of vulnerabilities that successful resistance revealed. Among communities most directly affected, oral traditions preserve memories through alternative narratives competing with official accounts. Stories circulating in agricultural settlements emphasize heroic examples, while minimizing ultimate defeat that governmental sources stress. Folk songs commemorating individual achievements transform historical figures into legendary examples, whose symbolic importance transcends biographical details, serving psychological functions that official prohibition cannot eliminate. Family histories tracing descent from participants preserve genealogical connections, linking present circumstances to past examples of courage and sacrifice. Marriage alliances uniting survivors create kinship networks, maintaining social cohesion despite efforts to fragment potentially dangerous communities. These relationships preserve not only memory, but also possibilities that proper circumstances and adequate courage might someday transform remembrance into renewed reality. Regional variations developing in response to differential treatment reflect local adaptations to changed circumstances that central authorities cannot micromanage effectively. Communities that cooperated with official armies receive preferential treatment, creating incentives for continued loyalty, while areas providing insurgent support face ongoing supervision, limiting economic opportunities. These policy differences create social divisions persisting for generations, while influencing attitudes toward authority and individual responsibility. As the first century before the Common Era draws toward conclusion, the republic that survived its greatest internal challenge carries within itself seeds of transformation that no amount of current stability can prevent from eventually germinating. Institutional changes that recent experiences necessitated alter fundamental relationships between governors and governed in ways influencing political development for centuries to come. The memory of a Thracian gladiator who dared challenge the mightiest empire the ancient world had known continues haunting corridors where senators debate policies designed to prevent similar challenges from arising. Yet the very measures that official prudence demands acknowledge implicitly that systematic oppression contains potentials for resistance that no amount of vigilance can entirely eliminate. In distant provinces where similar conditions exist, in workshops where skilled artisans labor under intensified supervision, in agricultural regions where workers tend crops feeding masters who sleep less soundly than their predecessors. Throughout the Mediterranean world, shadows remind both oppressor and oppressed that human dignity cannot be permanently suppressed, and that courage, once demonstrated, becomes cultural inheritance surviving individual mortality. The thunder has ended, but echoes continue rolling across landscapes where two armies once met to determine whether justice or power would prove stronger when tested by ultimate extremity. Silence that follows carries possibilities exceeding anything original participants imagined when they first seized kitchen knives and dreamed of freedom. Possibilities awaiting only proper circumstances and adequate courage to transform memory into renewed reality.